The Trump administration is dismissing concerns about the conditions on the USS Lincoln, even as the president confirms a new aircraft carrier is headed to the Middle East to relieve the approximately 5,000 sailors on that ship, which has been at sea for more than 240 straight days. As Navy families and lawmakers raise concerns about shortages of food and basic supplies and the deteriorating mental health of some of the sailors, the administration is accusing the media of misrepresenting the situation. Joining me now, Allison Jaslow, retired U.S. Army captain and Iraq War veteran and former CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and Kevin Barron, president of Elevation Global Strategies and former executive editor of Defense One. I'm glad to have you both here. Allison, where is the disconnect between the administration's view of the sailor situation and their reported experience? Are the president and Secretary Hegseth taking this seriously?
I mean, I think it's for the public to assess whether they're taking it seriously or not. I know that what is being reported is the feelings of family members. They're also relaying, word from their loved ones who are on board the USS Lincoln. And I think, most importantly, there's been a real struggle to have, members of the press both get the access that they need to do quality reporting, both in the Pentagon, but also be embedded with troops abroad. And I think if we had, reporters who could see with their own eyes on the deck of the USS Lincoln right now, we wouldn't have to be, dealing with hearsay and he said, she said between the Secretary of Defense and military families.
Kevin, the New York Times reports this entire situation stems from an Iranian retaliatory attack on a U.S. base in Bahrain in the first days of the war, which damaged a key logistics hub for the USS Lincoln. You've covered U.S. military deployments for years. Does this indicate a lack of planning to accommodate an attack like this by the administration? I mean, what has gone wrong here?
What's gone wrong? A lot has. Yes, it clearly is a bad planning because they never want to be in this position to begin with. Look, when the United States goes to war, you expect that the war is something that will be, the ending is not known. It could go on forever. It could go on for an uncertain amount of time. And the military bakes that into their system they have for years. Like you said, aircraft carriers are meant to stay at sea for a long time, and there's plenty of capability to get them equipped and stocked up with the supplies they need. But some things need to come to port. And so, yes, the nature of this conflict has exposed all kinds of things that clearly the White House and the Pentagon didn't prepare for, or didn't care about worrying about them when those consequences would happen. Like all of the strikes, not just at Bahrain, but all of the military facilities in the Middle East. It has now been, it's clear they are within striking range of Iranian missiles, and that's not ending. So the White House, he absolutely put themselves into this position by going to war so quickly and not preparing for a 6-month-long aircraft carrier deployment.
So that hearsay we just were talking about, Allison, MS now spoke to the wife of a sailor who jumped off the USS Lincoln last week. He was in the water for about an hour or so before he was rescued, and the wife, who was granted anonymity to describe sensitive mental health issues, says she was not contacted by Navy officials until 4 days later. But one of the last text messages she received from her husband read, "I think the boat is finally getting to me, and I really don't think I can keep up my peace act anymore. You were right about it all not being okay. We were supposed to leave 5th Fleet on July 15th, but then something had to come up, and my last hope of being home soon was gone. I'm really trying to not feel negative or hopeless, but between the Wi-Fi and not knowing when I will come home and not knowing what is happening back at home, it's really getting to me. I don't think I can do another deployment after this, and I don't even know if I can finish this deployment." So, Allison, the wife says that her husband tried to raise his mental health concerns up the ship's chain of command, but he was brushed off. How should Navy commanders be handling this situation?
Well, first of all, Alex, I'd like to acknowledge your colleague who did incredible reporting on the specific aspect of what's happening on the USS Lincoln. One of the things that really disappointed me about this reporting as somebody who has led troops in wartime is that there's always an imperative, whether you lose somebody, they're killed in action or injured, to quickly get word to their loved ones, because the last thing you want, and I think what happened in this instance, is for somebody to hear from somebody who's other than a uniformed military personnel as to the condition of their loved one who is abroad. And, of course, it's definitely concerning that, it sounds like this service member was raising alarm bells about his mental health and not getting the care that he needed on board the ship. But more importantly, when he made the tragic decision to go overboard, his family should have been notified very quickly. And I actually hope that it's investigated as to why the command didn't more aggressively address the situation and making sure the next of kin knew what was happening on the ship.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning Priya Sridhar, too. She is a rock star of a reporter. But, Kevin, President Trump's comments about the carrier not being out there nearly long enough, they seem to align with his plans to continue the blockade in the Strait. This from someone who deferred his own military service 5 times and never served. But with the USS Washington heading to the Middle East, can the U.S. ensure that the next round of sailors won't endure similar conditions? Is the U.S. prepared to extend this blockade indefinitely, as Trump suggested this week?
Well, there's a lot there. I think a lot of these comments from Trump and Hegseth, I just don't take them seriously. When I've seen the replay many times of Trump making that quip, and I can't tell if he's saying he doesn't think that the troops have been deployed long enough on that ship, or if he just thinks the war hasn't gone on long enough because we got to keep fighting. But it all just kind of reflects the bit of a callousness and how unusual it is for leaders like Hegseth and defense secretaries to speak this way when these kinds of wrongs are exposed through the press and make their way up the chain of command. I was on air yesterday with Leon Panetta when he was secretary. I covered like 8 defense secretaries, and every time there was a news report that would reveal mold on the base or some problem with military families, especially when it came to families, almost always the secretary or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, whoever got that information through the news would say, I saw these reports and we're going to do something about it, and we're going to look into it and make sure it doesn't happen again, and play with that way. It's not an immediate attack on the press. So it's hard to know how much how much that the leadership, the political leadership, like a Hegseth, takes this seriously. A Hegseth who was a soldier but was never the manager of a cabinet level department of the U.S. government, has never had to deal with a war like this, with this kind of, with these personalities and this kind of extension and uncertain future from the White House. We just don't know. Yes, the war could go on as long as the president of the United States wants it to go on. I think most people look at this war and think that it'll stop the minute that Trump stops fighting back, that the Iranians have a card. They figured out that as long as they don't need every missile in the world or nuclear capabilities to keep this war going. All they need is one drone to hit one ship in the Strait, and now they can poke the bear, Trump, and he's fighting back with even bigger firepower. So we're in this cycle until a lot of people think until Trump says we're not going to fight back anymore, we're going to get out of this and cut his losses or call it wherever he wants. It's just going to keep going on. So we can just hope that the next carrier on its way is better equipped, that the supply chain is ready to go, that they've figured out alternatives, because that strait is going to be closed for a long time. And again, every single one of those bases that has been proven now that the Iranians can hit them with missiles, hit them with drones. They've changed the calculus of the United States forward deployed military in the Middle East for as long as we can tell.
Allison, what should members of Congress be asking the DOD as it investigates the situation on the carrier? Who should be held accountable?
Well, obviously, there's a lot of questions about how conditions on the carrier are being managed right now. But I think, to one of Kevin's points earlier, this ship, deployed in November. This was a ship that was going out on a typical rotation to sea. It's before we invaded Venezuela and before we launched attacks on Iran. And I think the broader question for the Department of Defense and the Commander-in-Chief is, are we preparing for these prolonged conflicts that we're getting ourselves into? Because I think the cascading effects of not preparing adequately is what you're seeing festering on the USS Lincoln right now. And so obviously, there's a saying in the military, mission first, people always. We always have to take care of our people, which is not just taking care of their mental health, making sure that they're fed well, making sure that they have, what other, care that they need on the ship, that they're they're not getting right now because of logistics issues, but also clarity of mission. And so I think from the top down, from the Pentagon to the USS Lincoln or the George Washington, we need to have oversight from Congress to make sure that what's being managed across the globe not only is being managed well, but also with an eye towards the threats of the future too. We are actively watching our military force, not just the people, but also our equipment being degraded before our eyes. And we have to be really concerned about